the latest. Thank you for your love and support. I appreciate you all. We all know what is currently happening in the world, which is about Iran and the United States of America. Wait, Israel, we know what they did on the 28th of February that has led the world into this. And there are a lot of things that we need to also learn. So, Professor Lumumba is giving us how everything started and how we got to this place. And according to some of the things that he said, the United States of America under Donald Trump is making the whole world not to trust the United States of America, because you cannot decide to strike a nation when you are in the middle of negotiating peace. Because on Thursday, we all know that these two nations sat down and they even came out describing the meeting as the most progressive. They have never seen this, and they were all excited. We saw the posts and everything, even though there were people who were having their doubts about the United States of America. But people just said, let's see what happens, only for Iran to wake up to a surprise attack. So, Professor Lumumba is giving us history and how Donald Trump renamed the ministry, making it Ministry of War, and how from there they were yearning for this.
Americans have called Operation Epic Fury. When history is written, it may very well be said that Operation Epic Fury was a solution that is worse than the problem. Worse than the problem because it is an attempt to enforce what is characterized as peace by humiliation. And history is consistent, particularly in the Middle East, that all attempts at enforcing peace by humiliation have failed. The Americans themselves will remember the Camp David Accords, which gave birth to the Nobel Peace Prizes for Anwar al-Sadat and Menahem Begin. They'll remember the 1993 Oslo Accords, which also gave birth to Nobel Peace Prizes for Yasser Arafat, Shimon Peres, and Yitzhak Rabin. And they will also remember what they are now referring to, the Abrahamic Accords of the year 2020 and 2021. All these have been attempts by the American administration, successive American administration, to enforce peace on the terms of Israel. The net effect, of course, is that all those who are involved in the peace processes are humiliated, and any purported peace that is based on humiliation and domination never lasts. Iran is unique in the region, unique that it is the center of the Shia sect of Islam. The majority of the population in the Middle East are Sunnis. And in that sense, there is a sense in which there has always been undercurrents that are informed by what I call political Islam, and I use this term very deliberately. And we will remember that in the 1970s, in the 50s rather, 50s through to the 70s, 60s, and then to the 70s, the Iranian administration by the Pahlavi regime was a regime that was pro-America and pro-West. In 1979, when Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini and the patriarchs of the Shia regime took over and created a theocracy, they actually took the view that the state of Israel was illegitimate, and they have never recognized the state of Israel. So there has been this underlying hatred for this administration as an administration whose design is to obliterate Israel from the face of the earth. That is as far as Israel is concerned. But the Americans also have a problem. They have a problem that in 1979, during the Carter administration, the Americans were humiliated in Tehran. And I think from their perspective, there has always been a desire to have war in the narrow sense and in the overall scheme. I listened to the Secretary of State of the United States, Mark Rubio, during the Munich Security Conference in February of 2026, and one could see a person that was talking about a Western world that ought to protect its civilization, almost saying we need to recolonize the world, almost saying we need a war. And it is not lost on me that the Trump administration deliberately renamed the Department of Defense the Department of War. And from that point on, there has always been a desire to have this war. It was exacerbated, of course, when the Israelis, responding to the 7th of October attack, went into Gaza, and the war has been prosecuted in a manner that is unprecedented in the history of the world. What we now see is the accusation against Iran that Iran sponsors terrorism, that Iran sponsors the Houthis, that Iran sponsors Hezbollah, that Iran sponsors ISIS. And all these things are things that in the minds of some are debatable. And some argue that there is an old English saying, if you want to kill a dog, give it a bad name. So Iran has been given a bad name as the sponsor of terrorism. To their credit, the Iranians have always said, yes, we are enriching uranium, and we are enriching uranium for the purpose of ensuring that we have energy, in other words, peaceful means. The International Atomic Energy, under the aegis of the United Nations, has visited Iran on several occasions. And the reports have not demonstrated that uranium has been enriched to weapon grade. But the Americans are not in the business of listening to that. So that in 2025, when the Israelis attacked, and for a few days there was a war, the Americans then claimed that they had decimated what was supposed to be the nuclear preparedness of the Iranians. So one would ask, if that happened in the year 2025, why is it that the claim is being made is that the Iranians are once again having or exposing themselves as having nuclear capability? But the story has now changed. The story from the Israeli perspective is that if you want permanent peace, then you've got to decimate Iran. You've got to decimate their capacity to produce ballistic missiles, their capacity to produce drones. The Americans are saying we've got to decimate their capacity to produce nuclear device and also capacity to deploy and, of course, produce ballistic missiles and drones. The story has now converged from the Israelis and the Americans. And one can see that when there was an attempt to prosecute war in the year 2025, it was halted very quickly, and the Americans then said, let us begin to negotiate. But it's now clear it was not negotiation in good faith from the side of the Americans, and this must be stated quite categorically. In moments such as this, to be neutral is to be untruthful, because during the period that they purported to enter into negotiations, what the Americans were doing was to move their military arsenal to the Mediterranean Sea and to the Gulf. And once they were ready, once Abraham Lincoln was ready, once Gerald Ford was ready, without any warning and in the middle of negotiation, you could see the rhetoric. And the rhetoric from the President of the United States was consistent. That in the middle of negotiation, the rhetoric was vitriolic. The rules of negotiation are clear. when you are negotiating in good faith, it is done in silence. It is done in a respectful manner. You don't engage in saber rattling, but saber rattling was the modus operandi of the Americans. And once they felt that they were ready, then of course, they launched the attack, which had been planned for a long time because the CIA are now saying that we'd been following the Iranian leader Khamenei for a long time, and we knew where he was, and we supplied this information to the Israelis, and that is why he was eliminated in the manner that he was. And of course, his other aides were eliminated because, in my view, it was assumed that when you hit the head, then everything will disintegrate. And you hit the head in situations where there is also internal discontent and unrest because of the sanctions that have been imposed on Iran for a long time. The economy is on its knees. The currency is on its knees. The people are dissatisfied. And they are being told the reason why you are suffering is because you have this theocracy of individuals who are not interested in your rights. They are not respecting your human rights, and they are also not creating an environment where you can thrive economically. The assumption, in my view, therefore, and this is debatable, was that if you eliminate the supreme leader, Khamenei, then Iran would disintegrate. But history of Iran since 1979 has also been consistent. The administration and the regime is so organized that when you eliminate one, there is a process that produces another. And their conviction to their cause is something that ought not to be underrated. And if you listen to the interviews in the streets of Tehran, a few individuals who are anti-regime are now pro-regime, because you are now humiliating the Iranians as a people. And when you are humiliating a people, then they deal with their internal issues first. The Americans are saying, of course, and Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump has been consistent in saying, this is going to be a short war. But let us define short. It may be short in the sense that within a few weeks, the combatants, particularly the Americans and the Israelis, when they think that they have decimated the Iranians and now they have expanded to Lebanon, they may very well expand to Yemen and other areas, then they will sue for peace and get what they want: humiliation of Iran and having them effectively surrender. The Iranians warned in advance that if you attack us, this is going to be a regional war. And there are many people who are analyzing differently. The Iranians, of course, then said, we are going to hit all your bases, whether they are in Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, or Qatar, we are going to hit them. And they have, with the consequence that the value chain or the supply chain in the world has now been disrupted in a manner that was not anticipated. And I've listened to the arguments by the countries that have been hit at the UN General Security Council, saying that this is indiscriminate. But one can debate. If you lend yourself to be used by my enemy, are you not my enemy? And this is what the Iranians are saying. And as regards Saudi, and I think the Israelis want the Saudis to be involved, the Iranians have come out, it is not us who hit Orascon. This is false flag. It is the Israelis who are trying to hit Riyadh with a view to getting them into the conflict. I believe that will be verified in the near future. But Israel is doing everything and anything to ensure that this war is used to decimate the Iranian people. And what they wanted was to ensure that America was involved. When they did it in 2025, the Americans were not quite involved. Now that the Americans have started losing their young men, now the Americans will be deeply involved. And that is exactly what was in the playbook of Benjamin Netanyahu and the individuals who ran the government from Tel Aviv. As to how it will pan out is a debate. It is a debate, and that is how it legitimizes the debate as to how long the war will be. The conventional war may very well end, but will it end? Will it not breed a new group of individuals whose only reason for survival is that we must ensure that Israel never knows peace? And for the first time in the recent past, we have seen Israel being hit and hit quite effectively in Tel Aviv, in West Jerusalem, in Haifa, in Eilat. And these are things that are also going to generate internal discontent. And I am of the view, and I may be wrong in this regard, that the Israeli government and the administration of Benjamin Netanyahu is now a war economy. They cannot survive for a day, metaphorically speaking, without war. It is in their interest that a war is sustained, because it is only in that way, by externalizing your enemy, that you legitimize your being in power. Because the old saying is, when you are in a crisis, you don't change your leaders. And it must never be lost on us that there is personal existential threat to Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife in terms of prosecution for the activities that they engaged in. So these are factors that are there. I've also seen NATO is also saying that they support this. And there are those who are arguing whether this is true or not, is that there is an attempt by the Trump administration, an attempt by the Benjamin Netanyahu administration to create a rift between the Sunni and the Shia Muslims in that region. And that if you pit the big powers in both factions of Islam, with Tehran and Iran representing the Shia, and the Saudis, on the other hand, representing the Sunni, you'll create an environment where you make your enemies, because the Arabs in their totality, from the Israeli perspective, are their enemies since 1948. And if you get them fighting, then you are in a good situation. You let them fight and you sit pretty. So these are possibly conspiracy theories, but they are theories which can be anchored on the evidence that is available on the ground. For the region, economically, it is a disaster. Countries such as Qatar, that long boasted of having calm and peace, the Emiratis, which boasted of having calm and peace, the Bahrainis, the Omanis, the Kuwaitis, it is no longer business as usual. It is business unusual. When you have your entire fleet grounded in Qatar, Etihad, Qatar, the Emirates, it means that your economy is suffering. Countries are now evacuating, so that the foreigners who have been working in Dubai, if they are evacuated, they'll think again, because they know that this is a war that never ends. I always remember the word that was spoken by one person who was being interviewed in Gaza, and he said, the Mujahideen has a long memory. You may think that the war has ended, but once you have humiliated us, once you have dominated us, or so you think, we of this generation and generations yet to come will only exist for one thing: revenge. And I think that that is what is going to happen. I saw people in South Africa, in different parts of the world, talking about the martyrdom of Khamenei, and he is going to become a symbol. You remember when Osama bin Laden was eliminated, they threw his body into the sea. But Khamenei will be buried, and his burial place, like that of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, will become a shrine which will energize a new generation of young people who will want to ensure that America and Israel and the Western world is attacked.
As Africans, it's like we are still at the dark side of history. We believe so much in these people, but a lot of people are losing trust. Africans are still so much interested and so much having trust for these people because when it comes to our leaders, they always want to do the bid of the people. You understand? But Iran is fighting for sovereignty. That is one thing that a lot of us do not understand. This nation is fighting for sovereignty. What we have failed to fight for is what they are fighting for. And like Professor Lumumba said, when you want to unalive by a dog, you just have to give it a bad name. And this is exactly what has happened. We all know that Iran has been branded with a very bad name. They give us reasons to believe that this nation is not good, and it is this person that is doing this to the whole world. But with history, we have never seen Iran releasing boom on any nation. And these people are doing this because people are not serving their interests. It's just like what they started with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso leaders, whereby they told us that all in all, Captain Ibrahim Traore was trying to use the gold in Burkina Faso to enrich himself. In that regard, they tagged the leader. It's just that the youth of today, we were so smart enough to rise against their narrative. So because of that, we all rose up to defend our leader, Captain Ibrahim Traore. That is the reason to which they haven't been able to penetrate in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, because the youth of today are so much awoken. That is what is happening in Iran. They thought that, like he said, after taking out the leader, the supreme leader, it will weaken the nation and the nation will be divided. And in that way, they can come in and have their way. But this time round, everything has changed. One thing that we need to understand, and Yellow Popo is finding it difficult to understand, is the world is not stagnant. Everything has changed. And they said, one thing that is constant is change. So we need to understand, and the Yellow Popo need to understand that things will change. A time will come, the world will rise, and everybody is now fighting for freedom. People are tired because a group of people believe that the rest of us must be under their mercy, they must control us. And like the Brazilian president said, in this world, we do not have an emperor. So for that matter, people also rise to fight for their total sovereignty. For their total sovereignty. But it's like now they attack their own meat. Because Iran is doing everything possible in its power to fight for their own sovereignty. And people in Africa, some of us, do not just believe that this man that they are branding, that he is bad, is as a result of something. We have forgotten about our own history, the way they branded our leaders. The recent one was the president of, or the leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. The same names that they gave Muammar Gaddafi, that today a lot of people believe that Muammar Gaddafi was a dictator. But Muammar Gaddafi's crime at that time was fighting for the unification of Africa. One army, one currency, one leadership. That was the crime of Muammar Gaddafi. This is the same thing that is happening. People are fighting for sovereignty, and nobody wants to be under the mercy of another person when nobody feeds the other. So there are a lot of things that are happening that we need to understand as Africans. And we don't have to always buy into the narrative of these people, because this is a weapon they are using against any other person. And we have to fight for our total liberation. What Iran is doing is sending a message to us in Africa that we also need to fight for our total sovereignty. This is not a time for us to continue to be bowing down to other people. The world has changed. And in this new world, if you want to be fit in, you should be ready to fight to defend yourself. Freedom is not given, but it is taken. And Iran have realized that they need to take their freedom. And like he said, when you look at the Arab world, Iran is the only different nation. They are not the type who are ready to be bowing to other people, which the master isn't happy about. And for that matter, they will have to do everything possible to make sure they bring everybody under control. But things are not in that manner. So we need to learn our lessons as Africans, what to do in this time of this new world in order to save ourselves so that we will not be left behind. We are the only ones that can set ourselves free. United we stand, divided we fall. And united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we'll make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world. In Africa.